interesting quote from this morning. You said, if you are one of those companies not embracing big data, you are amongst the walking dead. And instantly I think, are we in the zombie economy?
Well, I tend to pop off a lot. So let me restate it a little bit.
Yep.
If you are not one of those companies that is embracing big data, particularly second generation big data solutions around streaming like PatternBuilders and S4, I think you're part of the walking dead, because very simply your competitors are, and you will not be able to compete. And you won't be able to compete on delivering service. You won't be able to compete on understanding your markets. You won't be able to compete on logistics. So it's basically you're going to commit suicide because you're going to let your competitors be better than you are.
So it's a strategic imperative in that context. Okay, well that's not as fun as talking about brains. But that's
I love those movies.
Well, it gets us into the conversation. That's what we want to see here. To operationalize this a little bit, you made that remark in the context of, I think, supply chain management. So what are the most important ways that big data can help people with supply chain management, which is just a bread and butter issue for businesses?
I think once again, back to sort of streaming analytics, we're now living in this Internet of Things. You've got IP-enabled devices with geolocation capability, environment centers. So in big pharma, for example, you have these very expensive cancer drugs that are regulated, and if the humidity goes out of a range, the FDA requires them to be destroyed immediately. And you're talking maybe $1 million a truckload. What big data allows and constant connectivity allows is you can actually put a sensor on those boxes and look at weather forecasts and understand what the packaging medium is, and redirect that truck away from a heat wave, for example, and save millions of dollars. That's one actually now example, and I think you're going to see more and more of that sort of stuff as well. And so I think that supply chain is really interesting, because supply chain and demand chain are really one continuum, but what supply chain became, because of limitations of technology, was all about manufacturing. But what if you could really work the demand chain in and, for example, have a sensor in a milk bottle that says, oh, this is low, right? And send it back. And then you start to really get a feel for, you could really get into real-time manufacturing, real demand understanding. And those are the sort of things I think we'll see probably in the next 5 years.
So one of the other challenges that we've seen, and this has come up in some headlines recently, is the issues around privacy, right? That there are unprecedented amounts of data, whether it's from healthcare, financial data, our mobile data, our social data, although in many cases that's something that people contribute on their own. But it's part of the larger context for how this immense amount of information about us now is floating around. And the story that a lot of people, I think, are thinking more about in this context is the one that recently broke in the New York Times about Target and young woman being able to figure out whether she's pregnant or not from data. So what should technologists be thinking about this and considering as they architect their systems, and what should citizens know?
Well, I actually think technologists should be sort of taken out of the loop here. This is really an issue about corporate responsibility. So what are the people that are collecting your data or buying your data doing with it? And what are you as citizens willingly giving up for free email, for the ability to network with your friends, for restaurant recommendations? I co-wrote a book on privacy and big data, and one of the reasons we wrote it was very clear to us that consumers had no idea that their data was the commodity that was paying for their Google account. And what I think is the most important thing for corporations to do is to have transparency. Privacy is a relatively new concept in the scope of human history, and it's always been something that's been relegated to the wealthiest and the most powerful. I think a lot of the discussion around privacy you're hearing now is big data and sort of ubiquitous technology makes privacy a concern for everybody that is part of the digital economy. And so there are a lot of powerful people now that realize that there's way more stuff out there about them than they're comfortable with. And I think it's going to be a continuing discussion.
So last question. There clearly are some risks to people's privacy or security. Identity theft in this context is something that comes up. But it is important to talk about something that came up this morning in one of the keynotes, some of the ways that big data can be used for good. And I've written a bit about this recently. People can find that on O'Reilly Radar. What are the most significant ways that big data is improving the world? Can you give me some concrete examples?
I can think of several. First, I'm going to give a plug for a great organization, Data Without Borders. My friend Jake runs that, and that's data scientists trying to find ways to use big data to help nonprofit organizations generally. Very cool stuff. But if you look at logistics, you know, half of the starvation problems in the world are not a lack of food, it's a lack of efficiency and distribution. If you look at medicine, big data techniques are being used to target medicines more effectively, to do better research. Any endeavor where human knowledge can be used to improve it, because big data improves the efficiency of human knowledge workers, can be improved by big data. But as I said, the food distribution, food safety, and medicine are the ones that I think are going to grab the headlines and are going to save the most lives.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Terence. It's Terence Craig. He's the founder, CEO, and CTO, a lot of titles, of PatternBuilders. You can follow him at Terence Craig on Twitter, and certainly keep an eye out for your book in terms of big data and privacy. Thank you very much. And it's a great plug for Data Without Borders. I think they're having a special event this weekend, so definitely check them out too.